The Ukrainians have concentrated more than 13,000 men to cross the Dnipro, at least according to Russian mill bloggers. A Russian admiral seems to be back from the dead, and while the Ukrainian Air Force has suffered some painful losses, at least it shows some confidence in their successes in the southern area of operation. We'll talk about this as well as about claims and indications about additional massive losses by the Russian ground forces in this situation report. Hello and welcome back to this situation report, back from my parents' house where I'm currently visiting. That's why the background is kind of uncommon. I'll be back in roughly a week when we'll go back to the usual setup with better audio and video quality. First of all, Admiral Viktor Sokolov has reappeared. He is or was the commander of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, but so far from what I've seen, it was only twice, once in a video conference call where he's only visible on video and blinks once, which shows some activity. He doesn't say anything, and it's quite possible, and there are some claims that it might have been prior footage that was just displayed there for information operational use. Also, the Russians publicized a video of him giving awards to Russian soldiers that have won a football tournament inside of the Russian armed forces. But this video was published from an event that happened before the strike on the Black Sea Fleet HQ, where Viktor Sokolov, the admiral, was supposedly killed. So right now, nothing is really proven yet. It's quite possible that he's still dead or that he wasn't hit. The Ukrainians have started to doubt their assessment. They say, according to their information, Sokolov is dead, but it's possible that it's wrong. They will reevaluate. In the past video, I think I said that I think the chance of this being true is 80 to 90%. Maybe we are reaching the 10 to 20%, and Admiral Viktor Sokolov is actually still alive. According to the Ukrainians, though, the strike on the HQ wounded 105 Russian soldiers, among them 2 generals, in addition to the fallen soldiers. So the Ukrainian side is still believing that it was a massively successive strike. Ukraine has also flown airstrikes on Kursk. It hit an FSB headquarters, an oil refinery, and the Chalino airport, where, according to the Ukrainians, a number of Russian officers of the 14th Guard fighter regiment were killed. It is equipped with Sukhoi 30 SM, and at least the expectation would be if they killed a number of officers, they might have killed the pilots. I do not see any proof of this whatsoever, so we have no idea how much this information is true. What we do know, though, is that the Russians hit something on the Ukrainian side. We have a couple of videos here that you can see where we can see a Russian Lancet drone diving onto a Ukrainian MiG-29, and it's hitting it in a moment. It's hitting it here. There's a second video supposedly showing the same thing, but at a different event. So another airstrike on a Ukrainian fighter jet. We can see that here, that it's when the hit supposedly happens, that it's of a different kind. So this is supposedly a different video showing us another strike, and here we have another video of a strike. Wait, where is it? Here is another video where supposedly another Ukrainian MiG-29 was hit, and we can see that it comes from a different angle as the first one. So in total, from what I found and understood, the Russians claim of having destroyed up to 3. Some claims it's only 2. I'm not completely sure. That those videos seem to be different, but in the end, we at least in 2 of those videos, it's not really clear from how they are made and what is happening. There could be the theory. You could explain that it could be old planes or decoys. The Ukrainian Air Force prior had a lot of additional airframes, but most of them were out of commission. Initially, in the first phase of the war, we saw airstrikes on airfields that have shattered tons of planes, but later it became clear that those planes were just parked there and were far, far away from being in operation, that they would have taken years of work on them, or probably at least years of work on them to get them back into operation. So theoretically, this could be a plane that wasn't in commission, but it's fairly unlikely as it was close to the front line in Mykolaiv and in Kryvyi Rih, where the Russians have the reconnaissance means to know that a plane, a Hulk, is standing there for months on end and it's never moving. So those should actually have been operational planes, at least the one we definitely can confirm being hit. Now, why is this important? First of all, it's obviously a disaster for the Ukrainians to lose one or up to three of their valuable airframes, but at the same time, it shows us their growing confidence in the south with their SEAT campaign, suppression of enemy air defenses. When we check the data, the information that's coming over the last few months, we see that all the time the Ukrainians don't just strike artillery, they don't just strike trucks and tanks, but they increasingly strike air defense systems as well, basically pushing the safety corridor for the Russian planes further and further back, allowing them more freedom of movement. This then seems to have led to the Ukrainians positioning their light fighter planes, the MiG-29, that has a shorter range and a smaller payload than the Sukhoi 27, closer to the front line to probably be able to go on intercept runs in this regard, and this might have cost them dearly in this regard. So while we can confirm some losses for the Ukrainians, at least I would interpret it as a growing confidence that those attacks on the Russian air defense systems have been somewhat successful, and that's where the future attackers will probably come into play as well, as they will keep striking Russian air defense systems with cluster munitions. They should be highly effective against Sukhoi, against S-300 and S-400 batteries further back, which are currently situated outside of the range of HIMARS systems. Then we go to the front line. Let's go to the front line itself. On the eastern front line, close to Kupiansk, the Russians were attacking once again. I cannot confirm any successes here. They also attacked in the south around the Serebryansk forest in this region. I cannot confirm any successes here. The Ukrainians themselves attacked in the Serebryansk forest. No movement of the front line as well. South of Seversky Donetsk, we have Russian attacks on Bilohorivka. The same, no successes confirmed, and the Ukrainians say they have been successful close to Ivanivske, which is Ivanivske is here. So that would probably indicate that they have been successful somewhat in the direction of Bakhmut itself, maybe into the forested area on the ridgeline here. But this is expectation from my side, how I interpret the Ukrainian claims. And I need to emphasize here, we are talking about Ukrainian claims. I do not have any proof that they actually have been successful here recently. A Russian mill blogger was saying close to Klishivka, the Russians had to retreat from some areas on the railroad line. But this is unconfirmed. I checked the mill blogger and it's a fairly, really small one that I actually didn't even know before. So I have no track record of him being accurate and no past experiences with him. It might very well not be true in this regard. The Ukrainians themselves report a number of counterattacks by the Russians on Klishivka. There is no claim, not even serious claim from the Russian side that those counterattacks have been successful. So it seems to not have been true. Colonel General Alexander Syrsky is saying that the Ukrainians have destroyed the 31st Guard VDV Brigade and the 83rd Guard VDV Brigade, both in the area of Bakhmut and Klishivka, etc. All of this is unconfirmed. It's the claim by the Ukrainian Ground Forces commander, Syrsky. But to put it into perspective, destroyed means in NATO terms that the enemy has been reduced in his combat power by 60% and is no longer able to fulfill any combat mission whatsoever, whereas shattered only means he is reduced by 30% and is no longer able to do his current mission, but theoretically still other missions. So if they claim they destroyed a unit, shouldn't be understood that every last man of them has fallen, every last piece of equipment has fallen, but it basically means 60% of the unit is gone, no longer operational. And at least according to the ground forces commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, this happened to 2 VDV brigades, so air assault brigades, that are being considered to be among the elite of the Russian forces and have been used intensively at the Schwerpunkts of the fight, where the fighting was the thickest. Further south at Avdiivka, the Russian side is reporting additional attacks of the Ukrainians, especially on Opytne and in Vodiane. So in this area, supposedly the Ukrainians are attacking with a higher intensity. There are no claims that I found of the Ukrainians having had some success there. There were also Ukrainian attacks at Krasnohorivka, so they probably tried to push back the Russians, where they recently gained some grounds in the tree line here, but I was not able to localize where the attacks happened, and the Russians are reporting a Ukrainian attack close to Marinka. Usually they were attacking here in the south, so it might have been there, but then again, no change in territory again. Closer to the border of the 2 oblasts here, south of Velika Novosilka, where Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia meet, there are some smaller Ukrainian attacks being reported, mostly at Priutne and south of Urushaine, down here, and sometimes from Staromayorsk. I have no claim that those were successful, so the attacks seem to have been unsuccessful. South of Orikhiv, I cannot confirm fresh successes from the Ukrainians in this area. Wargonzo, the Russian military blogger, is reporting that the Ukrainians were attacking Verbove and Novoprokopivka, but he said not especially intensive, thus they weren't successful. So smaller probing attacks, at least that's what the Russians are saying, and I have not seen any fresh geolocalizations that show us any change in territory either here. The counterattacks close to Novoprokopivka are now done by the 42nd Motorized Rifle Brigade from the Russians, and the interpretations are that the so far used VDV units in those areas already have suffered such a massive attrition that they are no longer able to be used for this. That they had to be replaced with others. If this is true, it's a good sign for the Ukrainians, but at the same time, it shows that they can still be replaced. So the Russians do still have some reserves in the areas with which they can replace current frontline units. On the bridgehead on the Dnipro, we have some developments as well. Interestingly enough, we have Riba claiming that the Ukrainians are preparing basically a massive landing here. It's unclear whether this is supposed to be big or whether it's just a reconnaissance landing, as Riba, for instance, mentions themselves. But what they are saying is that the Ukrainians have now concentrated 13,000 men there, among them 8,000 Marines, so supposedly soldiers that are particularly well trained to cross river bodies of water and thus attack. The concentrated material, though, is somewhat more dubious. If we see, it's mostly lightly armored transport vehicles and the impressive amount of 1 M777 howitzer and 1 Stormer air defense system. So it's not that much of a concentration of heavy forces, at least according to what Riba is giving us here, even though the personnel that was moved there is massive. We have reports from the SBU, from the Ukrainian intelligence agency, that a HIMARS strike on the HQ of the 70th Guard Rifle Division killed 8 officers and wounded 7. There is a video of the Ukrainian side striking a building. Obviously, the losses cannot be confirmed in any ways. This is a claim by the Ukrainians for which we won't be able to get accurate data or a confirmation whatsoever. When it comes to the troop generation of the Russian side, we now have reports that parts of Wagner that are led by Andrei Troshev are now apparently inside of Redut. This is a Ministry of Defense associated PMC. So they are now fighting for the Russian Ministry of Defense. The rest of Wagner under Anton Yelisarov is currently negotiating with the Rosgvardia, with the National Guard, about joining them. But the Rosgvardia apparently wants to sign up every Wagner man individually and thus being able to spread them around, whereas Yelisarov wants and apparently insists on signing them up as a group to keep their cohesion. Whether the Russians are willing to allow further cohesion by the Wagner people, which have caused some problems in the past, seems to be highly doubtful. So at least the idea of spreading them out seems to be a smart move from the Rosgvardia, especially considering that the Rosgvardia is supposed to be the one that is suppressing unrest and a mutiny like this. So it would basically put the people that caused the unrest, that caused a military mutiny, putting them into a unit supposed to suppress mutinies like this. So that they will be spread out seems to be logical, but we'll have to see how it turns out. We have more claims about the Russian force generation. Medvedev has said Russia by now has recruited 325,000 men since the beginning of the year, so the number keeps climbing. According to this would supposedly be sufficient to keep their troop numbers steady, and this is probably why we haven't seen the new mobilization wave yet. There are obviously massive implications towards the Russian society, whether or not Putin dares to do another mobilization. But at least according to what we see, the Russian government is apparently confident that they can at least keep up with their current demands, more or less, with the volunteer recruitment, more or less volunteer, because there are obviously the claims that migrants are being pushed in and that minorities are being pushed in, that the pressure is being put on vulnerable persons to join up, etc. We have a video from a new Russian suicide drone here, and that's fairly interesting. Now, this is supposedly enough to carry this warhead, and it's being equipped with an S-8KO. This is an unguided air-ground missile that can be launched from fighter planes, from strike aircraft, as well as from helicopters. And the full missile weighs 11 kilograms, more or less. With this probably or likely using it without its propellant unit should be significantly weaker. So whether or not this is able to fly with it, I have no clue, but it seems to be. The interesting part about it is it has a hollow charge that is rated for 400 millimeters RHA in penetration, so rolled homogeneous armor. That's enough to overcome lighter explosive reactive armor, and is more than enough to destroy and to penetrate any armor that is unprotected by strong ERA on the top and on the sides and in the rear of IFVs, MBTs, etc. So this could turn out to be a fairly efficient anti-armor weapon if the Russians can employ it, and supposedly they are going to mass produce this now. And with an FPV drone, you obviously have the advantage that you can fly around the target and attack it from another direction, thus arranging the warhead of your munitions to the highest effect. This is what they are going to use now, and at least to the informations we have, it could actually be a serious problem for the Ukrainian side. There's pictures here from a small steel pyramid that supposedly shows Wagner mercenary losses, and supposedly it holds the name of 20,000 of them that have fallen, likely in the capture of Bakhmut here. So we see Russia. In the past, there were some claims that their funerals, that their graves have been mutilated and destroyed. At least we see in some degrees there is an intention to remember them and to give them some degree of honor, despite Prigozhin's military mutiny. Kadyrov, and there we come to the political sphere, has published a video about his son Adam, who is beating up an arrested man, a man in custody, for he was accused to have burned a Quran. The Russian Human Rights Council is far from being happy. Its member Eva Merkacheva Merkacheva, said it's a challenge to the whole legal system of Russia, basically to Russia's rule of law, that in Chechnya, members of government, the leadership is able to publicly commit crimes and be open about it. Kadyrov somewhat stepped back from it. He said that his son is a hothead, but he basically did the right thing. But if a Russian court will find him guilty, then he will obviously pay the price for his crime. But it is not to be expected that this is actually going to happen. In international support, we have some news. There is the first Abrams. The first Abrams have arrived in Ukraine. This was confirmed. And there are some rumors now that the United States is currently preparing another 31. I have not found any confirmation that is somewhat trustworthy, and I cannot say how truthful the rumors are, but it seems at least somewhat likely, as the US have a significant production capability and even bigger storage. And while they have to rebuild the armor, they don't hand over tanks with depleted uranium armor. It still would allow them to deliver more than those 31 that were initially promised. But as said, as of now, I do not have any proof that they are currently preparing additional ones. It's at least rumored, though. And Zelensky recently said that the US and Ukraine will start producing weapons together. This was now confirmed by the US Undersecretary for Defense LaPlante. He confirmed it, so we will actually see some US production in probably inside of Ukraine. What will be produced is obviously up for everyone's guess. I would guess some missiles for HIMARS might be high on the list, but we'll have to see about this in the future. And Ukraine has identified a lot of Western companies as suppliers for parts for the Shahid drones. And according to The Guardian, which wrote it here, they were asking the West to basically allow them to strike the factories for the Shahid drones in Iran, in Syria, and in Russia. And they were asking that the West to deliver them the necessary means to do so, after basically telling the West that they are somewhat kind of responsible for the production of it. They haven't accused the West directly in aiding, because the components are commercial components that can't just be sold and bought on the free market. But this was obviously used as a way to pressure the West to help them destroy the factories for those drones that, while individually can be fairly easily shot down, in their sheer mass still cause a lot of problems to the Ukrainian side. We have a video now about a Russian strike on a Ukrainian train that we can see here in the background. It happened in Donetsk, roughly, I think, 80 kilometers away or 50 kilometers away from the front line. I think it was 40 or 50 kilometers away from the front line. And while this shows a Russian success, parts of its equipment are hit, the train is hit, we should not discount for the splinters that do some additional damage. It also shows us why we only see that close to the front line. To achieve a strike like this on a train outside on the railroad, you need in-time surveillance and you need a guided munition. In this case, it was possible by a drone flying over the front line and surveilling the coming train, and likely a Tornado S system has launched a guided missile to strike it, but this has limited range. If somehow the Russians find out that a train filled with Western equipment is at Lviv, there is no way of them to strike it in time, as even if it's being caught by a spy that immediately takes out his cell phone, it'll take 2 hours or more until the cruise missiles have launched and arrived at the position, which means the trains have left. So that we only see this across the front line, this is a perfect example to explain why it's only happening a little bit behind the front line, as to strike in other positions across the whole country, let's say in Lviv, let's say in Zhytomyr, for instance, anywhere in these areas, the Russians would need fighter bombers to be above the area, to have gained full air supremacy, to allow them to fly around in the air over the Ukrainian countryside to hunt down actively those trains, because obviously the pilot can identify a train. He might even with his optics be able to identify that it's clearly with military equipment on board, and then he can launch a guided munition, be it a glide bomb or anything like this, a laser guided bomb, but for that he has to be in the place. So while we see a Russian success here, at the same time this is very hard to repeat, as the Ukrainians can only be attacked some dozen kilometers behind the front line. Anything further than that would require Russian air supremacy, because otherwise the difference in time between the identified target and striking it is far too long to have guaranteed success, or anything close to guaranteed success, which basically limits the Russians to strike bridges, railroad yards, and expected storage sites where they think the items that were transported are likely being parked now. We have a claim here. There's a video going around showing Russians claiming that they received tank ammunition that didn't really work. So they open it up here, and we can see them unscrew the fuse, unscrew the body, and the whole shell is empty. Now this is being shown around now, basically claiming that the Russians receive high explosive shells that aren't filled with explosives. This is a possibility. Corruption is a well-known issue on the Russian side, but we cannot discount that this might be a propaganda from the Ukrainian side as well. There is no way I can easily confirm this was actually taken by the Russians, that this is actually a proof of the Russians supplying their tanks with non-exploding shells. And even if they do, this is not a massive problem, because otherwise we probably would have seen less trouble for the Ukrainians if the majority of the Russians were not supplied with non-exploding shells. Still though, it's likely that things like this have happened, as the corruption inside of the Russian military complex are well known and well documented, and are even admitted by the Russians. In the past I talked to you about the numbers, how many soldiers have already been sentenced for corruption, and it was usually in the 4 digits. So we are talking about serious accounts of corruption. It's one of the jokes at the beginning of the war that the report said Russian soldiers are stealing fuels from their tanks in Belarus and selling it to the public, and a week later when they had invaded Ukraine they were running out of fuel. Maybe not selling the fuel you were meant to use would have helped, but it shows us the symptoms and the problems that the Russians are facing. Ukraine is showing a new underwater drone. This was to be expected, as underwater explosives don't have the problem that overwater have, their usual suicide drones. As explosives the explosion takes the way of least resistance, and that's not the hull of the ship, that's the air outside. So the effectiveness of a suicide drone is massively diminished until they can use shaped charges, and shaped charges are difficult to use because they need an exact distance from the target, whereas underwater you just blow it up fairly close to it, and the water pressure does a good deal of the rest. Now, whether this is meant for blowing up, whether it's meant for transporting personnel, which it could be done for combat divers or anything, is far from certain yet, but we see that the Ukrainians do start their attempts to go underwater as well. And we have a video here from nets that were set up in Bakhmut, supposedly to help defeat FPV drones, but as we can see here, at least while the idea might not have been bad, in this case at least, it was not successful. And before we finish up, some more news about Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. For now the news are that a fair number of the Armenian leadership in Nagorno-Karabakh has disappeared. In some cases, it's proven that they have been arrested. And Azerbaijan asked for them as part of the capitulation agreement, and wants to put them in front of trial for treason, as they consider them traitors to Azerbaijan, as they have lived in Azerbaijan. Whether that's in accordance to the international rules of law, I'm not quite sure, but I don't want to judge it myself. This is just the information here, and Azerbaijan has now said that 192 of its soldiers had died in those short fightings that led to the capitulation of Armenia, showing us that the intensity of the fighting has been quite severe, and the losses on the Armenian side as well. So without the massive support from drones, the Armenian side would have probably held out quite a long time, but they didn't have air superior. They didn't have anything significant to defeat the Azerbaijani drones, and now we see the end of the Armenian presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. And leave a comment in the comment section what do you think about the Nagorno-Karabakh problem or conflict, how its outcome, how do you see it, and do you give me your idea why you think the Ukrainian side has fighter jets close to the front line at this point of the war. That's it from me for now. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like what I do and want to support it, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.